Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. With Mythic Plus finally here, we have 4 major new affixes that we have to play around going into the incoming season. These are all called Xal'atath's Bargain, with either Devour, Oblivion, Voidbound, or Ascendant that you have to play around each week from +2 level to +11. Once you hit +12, then the Xal'atath's Bargain becomes Beguile, just having a flat increase in the health and damage of the enemies. So from 2 to 11, there's some affixes that you have to play around, and we're going to go over them right here. The most deadly of these new affixes is called Devour, and Xal'atath will spawn and debuff all players in your group with these absorb shields, these negative absorbs. To remove them, you either have to heal them off, which can be really dangerous, especially if you're using cooldowns to blast heal through it. More conveniently, you can actually dispel them. They are magic effects, but they are also poison, curse, disease effects that can be removed. So any DPS player with an off dispel should always talent into it in these Devour weeks, so they can dispel themselves. Even hunters having that feigned death talent that removes poisons will work on this effect. Mass Dispel is also going to work on this effect. And if anybody has good just self-healing, personal self-healing, having a bit of that when Devour spawns on the players can be really incredibly helpful. As we start discovering some weak auras, I'll make sure I have them linked in the description down below. But once you see the Devour affix going out, slamming down all of the dispels as rapidly as you can is absolutely vital, because if you don't, then these are going to explode and kind of shield the enemy mobs for 10% of their health. When you do remove them properly for your allies, you grant your allies bonus health and 4% crit per stack onto your allies. You can get a very large crit buff for your team, and it's imperative to remove these quickly. Another of the challenging affixes is called Oblivion, where crystal orbs are going to rain down from the sky and then seek to merge and hit enemy mobs. Now, the thing that makes this more difficult is that they will adjust their position and their route to try to reach those mobs and absorb into them, giving the enemy mobs 10% damage reduction per orb. The challenge is, if the tank is moving around while these orbs are out, even if they're trying to help soak, it also changes the direction with which the Oblivion orbs are collapsing and moving towards those enemy mobs to soak them. So when Oblivion comes out, the tank can either kite away from them, but usually they end up being surrounded. They can either kite away from them, or they need to make sure they're standing still, and both the melee, DPS, healer, ranged DPS need to start running around the room and soaking as many of these Void Essence crystals as they can, as they give the entire party mastery and leech. More that the tank wants to help, the more it can sometimes be a negative. If you're sort of surrounded on all ends, the orbs can just choose all these crazy directions and kind of juke players out. So tanks, make sure you're standing still if possible. Otherwise, make sure you're kiting away. Kiting away can be very good so that all the orbs kind of collapse into each other. Range especially need to be on their toes and soaking these orbs very quickly for the incoming buff. As you can see, these affixes have Kiss Curse effects onto them, so when you resolve them faster, you get your reward. If you don't, you have some severe downsides. Voidbound has some of the most extreme buffs onto this one, netting players 20% cooldown reduction and bonus critical strike for 20 seconds when you resolve it. Voidbound is going to spawn this 1 health mob with a massive shield onto it, so you can use a lot of your executes onto them. Even Dispriest gets bonus damage when they hit Shadow or Death on a target that has a shield on them. And it starts on the tank. The Voidbound Emissary will start on the tank, but it can be drawn away by threat from healers or DPS or any of those sort of things. So make sure as a tank that you're taunting that mob. If you're ranged or a healer or something like that that gets threat on the Voidbound Emissary, make sure you're moving it into melee as fast as you possibly can, because it will absorb any sort of cleave damage, and killing this Voidbound Emissary is incredibly, incredibly important. The extra damage reduction it applies to mobs makes trash packs go so much longer than they need to, and it can very quickly lead into sort of snowball events where if it takes another round to kill off a mob or a boss or something like that, the fights can last considerably longer and get considerably more dangerous. The last of the affixes is called Ascendant, where Xal'atath will rain down these enemy mob orbs from the sky all around your party, and they go in 3 or 4 waves of orbs dropping down for a total of 10. These are exactly like the Raszageth orbs if you played in Dragonflight, where you are not only able to mass dispel them, use individual purges, interrupt them, but you can also stun, fear, disorient, any sort of crowd control effects like these that are moving, displacing the mobs, causing them to be disoriented. All of those things will dispel these orbs, granting players both movement speed and haste per orb stopped. These are incredibly, incredibly important, and if they go off, they are also giving the enemies additional haste. Some of the very overpowered effects for dealing with Ascendant is dropping like a ring of peace onto the group, and that way every single orb impact is going to just instantly be dispelled. You can also push them back with things like Typhoon, Leg Sweep, for stuns works great, especially with the increased range that you get access to. Priests can of course fear them. Usually what I end up trying to do with this is I try to make sure that I have one crowd control in my group at all times that's just associated with dealing with Ascendant. And so when I play my priest, usually I'm just holding on to my fear to deal with it. And I'm waiting for almost all of the orbs to already be down before I end up hitting my AoE, since you'll have like 3 or 4 that drop very quickly, and then the other 6 or 7 are going to take a little bit more time to fall down to earth, meaning that you need to hold on to that one individual crowd control for just a little bit longer. Biggest thing that you want to avoid doing with this affix is actually avoiding direct kicking them, since the dungeons themselves have so many casts like volleys that need to be directly interrupted to make those casts go on cooldown for 15, 20, 30 seconds. Directly interrupting these Ascendant orbs will dispel them and can be used in a pinch, but most of the time you want to make sure you're using overall crowd control effects or purges to dispel these, so that you can then have any direct interrupts used on mobs in the dungeon themselves. Keep in mind, for the incoming season, the best loot you can get at the end of the dungeon is capped at a level 9, but the best loot that you're going to get for your Great Vault is going to be at a level 10. That's going to be dropping Mythic track loot, and so if possible, you want to make sure you're maxing out your vault for Mythic Plus with 10s. Couple bonus tips for this incoming season. Keep in mind that Necrotic Wake has no more interactions with any of the Goliaths anymore. It's just picking up the orbs, javelins, and discarded shields that you see around the arena. If you want to open any of the doors for like the shortcuts or the checkpoints in mists, keep in mind that you need to be a Tauren, High Mountain Tauren, a Druid, an Herbalist, or a Night Elf in order to open any of those gates or click on the seeds. There's also buffs for Warriors, Dwarves, and Blacksmiths in the Stone Vault with the Imbued Iron Bar, which grants versatility for your team. City of Threads has the projections of Queen Anzarek that Rogues, Priests, and Engineers can click on to be able to get a DPS and HPS buff. But keep in mind, you have to stand near that Anzarek sort of image until you receive the buff in order to actually get it. And in Arakara, the dead discordant attendants that are kind of like laying around the room, you get tailors are able to click on these and get like a 10-second stun, which would be kind of useful for the mini bosses, especially the one in the dead center of the first boss arena where Avanax is going to spawn. That guy does like a crazy amount of AoE. But happy dungeoning going into Season 1. Let me know if you have any questions or looking for any sort of incoming tips for this season. Huge thank you to our patrons who make all this content possible. If you'd like to support the channel and get early access to new videos, be sure to check it out in the description down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.